Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Russell here and I'll be doing your lesson this week and we are analysing fiction. What we're doing is we're alternating your lessons between a reading lesson and a writing lesson. So this is another reading lesson and you've already done two of those, one with Miss Brockman on poetry and one with Miss Smith on non-fiction writing. So today we're looking at fiction. So we're going to be reading the opening to a novel, and a novel is just another word for the opening of a story. We're going to look at one of these exam questions that we might get, and we're going to think about that, pull it apart and think about what our response might be to it. And then we're going to examine the writer's use of language and think about what words the writer's used and then what that might suggest. Okay, you will have seen this before, but we just need to keep this fresh in our mind that to get the best marks and to really impress the person reading our response to a text, we need to analyse. And it's often the hardest thing to do, but you guys are starting to get really good at that, as we've seen in the paragraphs that you're sending to us, and we need to keep working on it. So just a reminder that when you're analysing, it means you examine something in detail. So you pull it apart. And then you try and explain and interpret that. And that's what we're doing in our paragraphs when you're sending those to your teachers. Okay, so the book we're going to be looking at is a book called The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. And I've put the front cover on there for you, so if your kind of interest is piqued when you read it and you want to perhaps explore reading the book for yourself, you can see what it looks like. So our question today is, how does Gaiman create atmosphere in the opening of his novel, The Graveyard Book? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this question on the next slide and really pull it apart, which is what we do with all of these types of questions. And you've noticed a pattern that they're starting to be quite similar in how they pose their question to us. So here we go. Now, for those of you at home that are writing down some new exercise book on a piece of paper, this slide's going to be up for quite a while I talk through the keywords in the question for you. So, most of our questions, a lot of the questions that we look at start with the word how. So when you see that, what you should start to be doing, and you will get more and more confident at this because we'll keep doing these questions so that when it comes to exams, you're just like, yep, know this question. When you see that word how, it should make you think of, what is the writer using? How is our writer doing something? And when a writer's doing something, they are making decisions about what words they want to use, what techniques. So techniques are things like similes or metaphors or personification, for example. Or, if we're really pushing ourselves, the structure that the writer uses. So that's the first really important word, and it's starting our question with it, how. Then I've just highlighted the word Gaiman, okay? Sometimes your question might say, how does the writer create atmosphere? In this case, they've used the surname, and we always refer to the writer with their surname, not their first name. Then I've picked out this word create. Now I've pulled this out because I think it should remind us and make us think that this story isn't real. Okay, it's been made up. The writer sat there and come up with this story, as you guys have last week when you were doing your openings for a story, and they've tried to pick certain words and create certain characters for us. So it's to remind us that they are doing something and they're deliberately trying to do something to us as a reader. This links on nicely to this word atmosphere, which is the main part of our question really. Now, when we think of an atmosphere, some of you might think of the atmosphere out in space. But for this question, if we talk about an atmosphere in literature, it's to do with the feelings that are created or the mood. So sometimes if you walk into a room where somebody's just had an argument, you can sometimes tell because there's a bad atmosphere. You just get that feeling, and that's what that reminds me of. So when we read this opening paragraph, excuse me, when we read this opening paragraph, I want you to think about, okay, what mood or feelings are being created as I read it to you. The final one that we're looking at, and I just thought it was interesting to think, we haven't read this opening of the book yet, but the fact that it's called The Graveyard Book, and I've picked out that word graveyard, is almost giving us clues as to what type of a book this might be. And we might have expectations as a reader about what kind of atmosphere the writer might want to create in the opening of a story called The Graveyard Book. Now, I want you to always do this when you get these questions. When we're back at school and we give you these questions for an assessment, or for if you get this in an exam when you're older, is always pick out the keywords and try and pull it apart a little bit, and it will keep you focused and help you understand the question a little bit more. Okay, so here is our extract. I'm going to read this to you in a moment. As I'm reading it to you, just try and enjoy it for the story first of all, and then in the back of your head think, oh, what kind of mood or feeling or atmosphere is it created? Is it creating? Now, you might not have one. You might not feel anything when I'm reading this to you. However, what would be good to do is think of what do you think the writer's trying to create? Okay? If you don't want to listen to me read it and you'd rather read it to yourself, then you can just pause the recording here or stop it, and then you can have a read for yourself, and then we can whiz through it. So I'll read it through to you once, and then on the next slide I'm going to give you a little bit of time to go through it with the question in your mind. There was a hand in the darkness, and it held a knife. The knife has a handle of polished black bone, and a blade finer and sharper than any razor. If it sliced you, you might not even know you had been cut. Not immediately. The knife had done almost everything it was brought to that house to do, and both the blade and the handle were wet. The street door was still open, just a little, where the knife and the man who held it had slipped in, and wisps of nighttime mist slivered and twined into the house through the open door. The man Jack paused on the landing. With his left hand he pulled a large white handkerchief from the pocket of his black coat, and with it he wiped off the knife and his gloved right hand which had been holding it, and then he put the handkerchief away. The hunt was almost over. He had left the woman in her bed, the man on the bedroom floor, the older child in her brightly covered bedroom, surrounded by toys and half-finished models. That only left the little one, a baby, barely a toddler, to take care of. One more and his task would be done. He flexed his fingers. The man Jack was, above all things, a professional, or so he told himself, and he would not allow himself to smile until his job was completed. His hair was dark and he wore black leather gloves of the thinnest lambskin. The toddler's room was at the very top of the house. The man Jack walked up the stairs, his feet silent on the carpeting. Then he pushed open the attic door and he walked in. His shoes were black leather, and they were polished to such a shine that they looked like dark mirrors. You could see the moon reflected in them, tiny and half full. The real moon shone through the casement window. Its light was not bright, and it was diffused by the mist, but the man Jack would not need much light. The moonlight was enough. It would do. He could make out the shape of the child in the cot, head and limbs and torso. The cot had high, slatted sides to prevent the child from getting out. Jack leaned over, raised his right hand, the one holding the knife, and he aimed for the chest. And then he lowered his hand. The shape in the cot was a teddy bear. There was no child. Okay guys, so hopefully you enjoyed that as much as you can enjoy a creepy opening to a story about a man trying to kill a child. But hopefully it did create some kind of atmosphere for you. It did try and create a mood and some feelings. So with this question in the mind, which was asking us how the writer is creating atmosphere in that opening, what I'd like you to do is now go back through and pick out some words or phrases that you think do create atmosphere, that do answer that question. Now, if you've printed this out, or you can print it out, it might be easier for you to highlight them on the sheet. Or you can just jot down a bullet point list of some quotes that you think are the best ones at creating an atmosphere. Now, a little tip for you to be thinking about is what atmosphere is being created. Okay, so what feelings or mood is created for you? So for me, I found it quite tense. Okay, I was waiting for him to commit his final murder. I also found it quite creepy that there's this man like sneaking around in somebody's house while the family were asleep at night. And there was also, for me, a feeling of danger. that was created quite well. And you might have got different feelings or picked up on a different mood, but if you weren't sure, then those might help you a little bit. So here you can see there's a link, so you can click on a timer for 5 minutes, and if you want to take more than 5 minutes, that's fine. So you can pause the PowerPoint here and spend 5 minutes or more going through and picking out some of your own quotes. Okay, so hopefully you've found some parts of the text and highlighted or written down some quotes that you thought did a great job. If you're still struggling, then this might help you get an idea of what you need to do, or you can pinch these if you didn't pick them out. If you were struggling and then when I go through these you're like, okay, I see what we're meant to do, then obviously pause the PowerPoint, go back and have a little go at finding some of your own. So let's just talk through these. So these are 3 I picked out. There are a lot more, and if we were in a lesson we'd probably end up spending a lot of the time talking about this and sharing ideas, and you'd add them and we'd have a full-on discussion. So I'm just going to talk you through some of these so you get a little bit of a feel for that sort of thing that we'd do in the lesson. So the first one I've picked out for you is this one that's in this long descriptive sentence, but I've picked out the bit that says, "Wisps of nighttime mist slivered and twined into the house." Now, I think that creates quite a creepy atmosphere, and remember we've got to keep thinking about atmosphere. And the words that I'd pick out there are things like that word slivered, and this idea of the mist slivering, because it reminds me a bit of a snake, that are kind of sneaky and a little bit eerie and a little bit unpleasant. And also the fact that it's mist doing that means it's almost like, because mist is a type of weather that means you can't see so clearly, which almost is great for a murder, isn't it, if you can't see the person there so clearly and things are a little bit disguised. Also, the fact it's nighttime as well, and that's referred to. We often associate things that happen at night with things that aren't so good. If this was daytime, it perhaps wouldn't be so creepy or scary. My second one I've got there is a really short sentence that says the hunt was almost over. Okay, just the fact that you've got that short sentence is almost leaving us hanging and waiting for the next event to happen. The word hunt as well reminds me of like an animal and its prey, which is sounds quite dangerous and deathly. So that one stood out to me as well. Also, this last one at the bottom I picked out was a bit more descriptive than that second one I just talked about, and it's this one says, "Its light was not bright and it was diffused by the mist." And it was just that description of the word light really there. Now light, I always think makes you feel safe. Sometimes it can remind us of hope and bright futures, but the fact that it's described as not being bright almost makes me think of this idea that perhaps the light is going to fade or be put out, and might be linking to the child's future because they're about to be murdered. So if you want to, go back through and see if you can find any more. If not, we're going to move on and now look at what we do once we've picked out some of these quotes. Okay, so on the screen you can see I've picked out that second quote I was talking about, the hunt was almost over. Now notice what I've done. You'll have seen these before. We do these all the time, so we pick out our quotes and then we break them down into bits and start looking to individual words. And we always do this, and you guys need to always do it as well, because it allows you to have lots of ideas, which makes the writing up your paragraphs and writing up into full sentences much, much easier, because you've already thought about the different things that you could say, and then you can just pick your best ones. Now in the corner there you can see in that black box I've just put the question there, atmosphere, because I'm reminding myself that the writer is asking us what kind of an atmosphere is being created. Okay, we want to think about what is the writer doing. So when I picked out this quote, I thought that the atmosphere that the writer was creating was an atmosphere of danger and death. Now I've already talked about it a little bit, but I just wanted to show you how I want you to do yours when you do your little bit of work in a moment. So you can see I've drawn an arrow off the word hunt, and I've actually written a couple of ideas here. So I've written a hunt usually ends in death. Okay, it reminds me of like a wild animal looking for prey, but the fact that that reminds us of that death is creating that dangerous or sinister atmosphere. Then I had a look at this word almost. Okay, now I thought that this made it quite tense, because if something's almost over, it means it isn't over and there's still more to come. And what is there more to come? We know it's more death, don't we? Because he's already killed 3 people in that house and he's looking for his last one. What we're going to do next is I'm going to give you some time to do that, and look at your own quotes and start doing some spider diagrams around them where you pull them apart. So here, look, we've got 5 minutes again, or you can spend longer. There's not really a time limit at the moment because we're not in exam conditions. You can do more than one of your quotes, but pick at least one and then jot down some of the ideas around it. Remember, we're thinking, what atmosphere does it create and how? And the how bit is when we look at those words. So take 5 minutes now, and then on the next slide, we'll talk about how we write this up. Okay guys, hopefully you have found that okay, and you've managed to pick a quote and you've managed to pull it apart. So here you will recognise this again. I've written a paragraph that's a P paragraph. Now, for the benefit of you guys, so you can see my thinking, I've split my paragraph into 3 sections. So we've got a sentence for P, which we know is the point, a sentence for E, which the first E is evidence, and then the bigger bit, the chunk at the bottom, which picks up the most marks and really impresses the person reading your writing, is the explanation, where you explain all your wonderful ideas that we've just built up to. So let's look at this first sentence. Now, whenever you're making a point, you need to make sure that you're thinking about the question. So I've opened mine with the atmosphere of danger is created by Gaiman in the opening of the novel. So I've made it really focused there and made it clear that I'm talking about the atmosphere, but I've said what atmosphere I think the writer is creating. And that will really help, because when I explain it later, I can talk about why it's a dangerous atmosphere. Then, as you guys know, you follow that point with some evidence, and we've already done that. So I've picked out my evidence as the hunt was almost over. Now, what I've tried to do is, if I put that first P and that E together, it will make one nice flowing sentence. So if I read that to you now, the atmosphere of danger is created by Gaiman in the opening of the novel. This is shown when the writer states that the hunt was almost over. Okay, so hopefully you can see how that is all flowing into one sort of sentence that I haven't said I can see in the quote. I've tried to blend it in, and that's quite tricky, but it's something that if you practice, you'll get really, really good at it. And then the most important bit is our final E for explanation. This is where you explain why you think that atmosphere is dangerous. So I'll read it to you and explain as I go along. By using the word hunt, Gaiman suggests to us that this man is like a wild animal looking for his prey, which creates an atmosphere of danger, as a hunt will most likely end in death. Okay guys, so we've talked about that, I chatted you through it, and this is just me writing it up into a lovely sentence. So that's my first word explained. Now, this is where we start analysing, because I'm now saying something else and I'm picking out another word to talk about. By combining this with the adverb almost, we get a sense of something about to happen, which creates a sense of tension and fear, as a toddler is next on the target list of this killer. This will make the reader feel very unsettled, because a tiny child's life is at risk, showing that the atmosphere of danger has been created. Okay, so I just want to point out 2 things that I've done there that we'd like you to try and do if you can. Now you'll notice I've said the adverb almost. So what you can do is, if you're not sure what type of word you're looking at, you can look in a dictionary and it will say often noun, verb, adjective, adverb. Or you can type those into Google and it'll come up with a definition and often tell you what type of a word it is. If you're not sure, it would be fine to put the word almost. But by saying adverb or adjective or noun, depending on what type of word it is, you're showing off to the examiner or your teacher that you can talk about specific bits of language and what types of words they are. So that might be something you want to consider doing this week. The final thing that I'd like you to try and do this week is to talk about the effect on the reader. Now, you are the reader, I'm the reader, but I've put here, this will make the reader feel very unsettled. So there I'm explaining what the writer is doing to us and how he's making us feel, which links back to that question, doesn't it, about atmosphere. So hopefully that's given you an idea of what you need to do when you write it up. Now, when you put yours together, you don't need to split it into a separate sentence for point, evidence, explain for your P. But if it helps you at this point, then do that. But if you want to then write it up as one, then that would be great. And that's what we're aiming for as we do more and more of these. Your next screen is showing you how to write up your ideas. Now, this might help you if you're struggling. So we've got some sentence starters. So you can steal that opening point, the writer creates a, and you decide what kind of atmosphere. Then I've given you some sentence starters for how to introduce your quote. And then probably the most useful one is the final one, where we've got words like suggests, implies, hints at, or makes me think. And if you use those in your explanation, it will make you explain your ideas in a little bit more detail, which is the key with your explanation. So this week, guys, we want you to have a go at writing one of your own paragraphs about the Graveyard Book and how it creates atmosphere. And we'd love you to email us with those. Now, some of your teachers might have a Google Classroom, and it's fine to share your work on there instead. But an email or on Google Classroom would be brilliant. One thing I want to say is, don't worry if you're finding it tricky, okay? Even though we aren't sat with you in a classroom and you could easily ask us a question, we are available on email, okay? So you might have your point and evidence and might be finding the explanation a bit hard. So how about, if that is you this week, you send the first bit to us and then ask us a question like, could you give me a few tips on how to explain? And we will email you pretty quickly with some help so you can improve it and then hopefully do the whole paragraph. So don't be afraid and worried that you can only send it to us if you've completed it and you think it's great. All we want to know is that you're still trying and you're giving it a go, and then we can help you to try and get better. Hopefully you've enjoyed this week, you enjoyed the extract. I tried to pick something a little bit different. Hope you're keeping up with all your work and you're feeling okay. So take care, have a good week, and hopefully we'll see you soon.